Hello. Greetings from the inside of my pantry. When you don't have a budget and you don't have a whole studio set up, you gotta find places that are quiet where you're not gonna get room echoes and stuff. And I was using my car for that for this season. And then I sold my car because it costs a lot of money to have a car in New York. And frankly, the primary thing I was doing with it that I needed it for was to visit my father, who is no longer with us in the universe. So I couldn't really justify it. I'm also sick. I don't have COVID. I just tested myself. I definitely don't have the flu. Just some low-level virus that just keeps sticking around and pulling me down. Anyway, what I've really been thinking a lot about is how on this podcast and in my life, I can have deeper conversations about hard things with people. I want to hold space for people who don't come from the same perspective that I do. I want to be smarter about my own views. And I want to really understand how I can accept that certain things I feel are feelings and emotions, and that some of those emotions, uncomfortable as they are not facts. And that they are worth considering and that it is worth listening to where other people are coming from. But it's very hard to do that because we don't have very good conversations. We, all of us, people, myself, you probably. It's hard. I'm really working to get better on that with the people in my life about dumb stuff, just meaning like our own little quibbles about whatever. And the bigger issues, something that I think a lot about. How can we learn to address our differences and stay connected when we disagree? Sometimes we can't, but usually we don't try because we're afraid, we lack the tools, the information. We conflate our emotions with facts, and we don't believe that how we see facts does depend on the context or the lens through which we look at them. I believe these things to be true. Conversations that are respectful, that don't judge, that are done with an open heart and open ears, and not a need to be right or to shut out things that are uncomfortable, make us much, not just better humans. I think it makes us happier. When I can do that, my heart is filled in a way that when I am struggling and avoiding and trying to dig my heels into my lane, I don't feel. And for what? Anyway, these are the questions I ask. I talk with today's guest about hard conversations, and this is the beginning of what I hope will be more of those on this podcast. Welcome to Life Changing with Dori Fern, a podcast about who we are, where we're going, and what connects us. It's a show for people in progress at any stage.
Back then, most of the women on Women in Music panels were up there telling the rest of us women that the way we could succeed is to learn to behave.
But let me tell you about today's guest. I met Vickie Starr in 1997 at our mutual Park Slope block party. My then husband and I had recently bought a 2-bedroom co-op on a not yet gentrified block in Brownstone, Brooklyn. We used Steve's modest bar mitzvah savings to pay the 10% down, which at the time you could do to buy a place. Anyway, different days indeed. Vickie and her then partner Linda were, like us, parents to 1-year-old daughters. And the details of that day have fallen away, but my memory of meeting her is vibrant, electric. I had an immediate, almost somatic, in my body, a sense that this fast-talking lesbian mom who worked in the music industry was my people. I just felt it. That our friendship was inscribed in the mysterious way that some relationships just are. 2 years ago, Vicky invited me and a handful of her friends to celebrate her 60th birthday in Ibiza, Spain. And the night we arrived, we dragged our senior asses out to Glitterbox, a popular house music party on the island. I am her heady coach friend. I'm able to slow down her speeding mind and mouth so that she can see new ways forward. She has the executive functioning skills that I lack. She just turned me on to Todoist, which has been a very helpful app that I can write all my tasks and keep them organized and put them in my calendar and get them the hell out of my head. Together, we dance. Here's my conversation with Vickie Starr. Hello, Vickie Starr.
Hello, Dori Fern.
Who are you and what should people know about you?
I like the term arts facilitator and activist.
Okay, so let's talk about that. How did you get into what you ended up doing in the music industry?
Totally by accident. I moved to New York and I wanted to meet people who were like-minded, activists maybe. I'm not someone who goes and meets people in bars. I was never that person. Don't get me wrong. I like to drink. I just don't.
I'm going to say, she likes bars.
I like
audience.
Bars, but I like to already have my friends with me when I go to the bars. You know.
How did you end up with a show on WBAI?
I just wanted to meet people in meaningful ways. And so I joined the Women's News Collective, and we always needed music in between the news segments. And because it was a women's news show, somehow it kept coming down to like Sweet Honey in the Rock and Holly Near. For the music. Most people probably have no idea what I'm talking about, but there was a time back in the day where women's music were like crunchy granola hippie lesbians doing like touchy-feely hippie crunchy music. And don't get me wrong, I love Sweet Honey in the Rock. I loved a lot of those artists. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, guys, what about like Susie and the Banshees? What about like Queen Latifah? So after about a year, I ended up getting a music show. Started one day a week, eventually became 2 days a week. That was Women in Music. But it was very intentionally trying to open people's minds about what that meant. I would play New Order, which most people didn't know New Order had a female keyboard player.
I did not know New Order had a female keyboard player.
Because New Order's whole shtick was to not focus on the band members and to be kind of like, they're just New Order. Mm. It's just stuff like that. Women in hip hop, women in dance music, all kinds of stuff.
Is that when you became Vickie Starr?
It is. The name was given to me by someone at the radio station. Because my name is Vickie Stellar. My family called me Vickie growing up. I was already Vickie Stellar. And I went into the radio station one day and some guy was sitting there who I hadn't met yet. And I introduced myself as Vickie Starr, and he's like, Victoria Starr. What a great name. And I was like, yeah, that is a great name. I'm going to take that. And from that day forward, on the radio, I was Victoria Starr. And then I kind of got stuck because I never meant to like lose my family name. I like my family name. Mm-hmm. But
Stellar is a pretty good name too.
Stellar means star, right?
Yeah, right.
Then when I went into formally working in the music business, I kind of had to keep the name because people knew me.
Right.
Then I already had this legacy of being a journalist and a radio host and radio producer as Victoria Starr. So I couldn't then suddenly just not take that history with me into my profession.
Right. It was your kind of like your married name.
Kind of, yeah.
Married to the music.
There was a panel on women in music that I was not on, but I was in the audience. And that year, I think it was like 92, 91, 92. Back then, most of the women on Women in Music panels were up there telling the rest of us women that the way we could succeed is to learn to behave. Be very careful about how you conduct yourself in meetings. Be very careful about what you say. Don't offend the men. And about halfway through the panel, a bunch of us just got up and walked out. Like, clearly incensed, like, throwing out some comments as we walked out the door. And we all walked out, not everybody, but those of us who walked out, we all congregated outside of the door in the hallway. And we were so upset. And we started a group called SWIM, Strong Women in Music. Mm. And it was about 10 of us, 12 of us. It was Ann Powers, who was writing at the time for the Village Voice, Evelyn McDonald, who was writing at the time for the Village Voice, Felice Ecker, who was a publicist at a record label and who became my partner at Girly Action eventually. I'm sorry, this is a very long-winded story. But we started this group called SWIM, Strong Women in Music, and we intentionally wanted it to be like, we sort of loosely referred to it as Riot Girls for grown-ups. Meaning, and not to in any way belittle Riot Girls, but Riot Girls was a movement of like young college and 20-something, mostly artists and feminist activists, right? But we were people who were trying to have a profession in the music industry. So what we wanted to do was to create this support group for women in the music industry to be actively and openly feminist.
And make a living.
And still be able to make a living in music, in the music industry, and not be like putting our jobs in danger. So we had meetings, we had some showcases where we showcased artists. We did a boycott of the Grammys the year that there was one year, I think it was also 92 or 93, where the Grammys canceled the best female rock category because they said there weren't enough good rock albums by women that year. And this was the year Liz Phair's Exit from Guyville came out. This was the year Tina Turner's triumphant solo album came out after she was like, fuck you, Ike. There were some huge records that came out that year. And the Grammys just decided they weren't worthy. So we did a huge picket line outside of Radio City Hall that night and got a lot of press coverage for it. So stuff like that. Anyway, long story short, through that, I met Felice Ecker. And I was at the time a journalist and also writing a book. And when I finished writing the book, I didn't know what I was. It was a biography of Katie Lang. But when I finished the book, I didn't know what I was going to do with myself. And then Felice Ecker decided to leave her job at the record label and start her own PR and marketing firm. And I started by just kind of helping her out. And then she asked me if I would become her partner. And I did. And the rest is history.
There's a lot of talk in this next section about music, PR, and marketing. So, some background. When Vicky became a partner at Girly Action, the PR company founded by Felice Ecker, who she speaks about in the last section, she was brought on to take over the work that Felice needed help with. Felice was a publicist, which in the early 90s meant her work involved getting artists placed in media outlets, magazines, newspapers, on TV shows, and she worked closely with the artists in this capacity. Vicky, on the other hand, worked behind the scenes with the record labels because everything artists did in that era was connected with their record label. This was a simpler time in the music industry. Then, in 1999, Napster launched. Music became digital. MP3s started replacing CDs, tapes, albums. Media, too, was becoming digital, and print-only magazines were going online. Digitally native platforms like AOL were becoming more prominent. Everything was changing fast. Then, in 2003, MySpace launched. Music and musicians became social. Girly Action, like every other music industry business, had to adapt. Vicky led the charge, developing new divisions to meet the needs of their artists. It forced her to become an expert in areas she knew nothing about. She had to change course quickly based on ever-changing trends. She started Girly Action's digital marketing practice. At the start, this meant getting 10 interns to chat on MySpace about their artists. And later, when Facebook exploded, it came clear that artists had to learn to promote themselves. You know, my own digital marketing career has required me to stay on top of trends, although no trends move faster than the music industry. But I've had to understand the habits and needs of diverse populations as they change. And I enjoy innovation and change. I am interested in new technologies like AI. Vicky would not describe herself that way. Not now and not then. And her musical tastes may be diverse, but as she told me, she's never considered herself particularly current about the internet. So it was no small feat to achieve what she did in the early aughts. At 40 plus years old in a youth-driven environment like the music industry, at this transformative time. And so you did the marketing part of the business?
No, for the first few years, we were only PR.
You were only PR, okay.
And it was just Felice and I, and we had one other person who started as an intern and who we eventually hired, and then we started to grow. She was front of the house, so she would be pitching all the journalists, press stories, and I was back of the house, meaning I did all the client relations. Mm-hmm. But then eventually we grew and started other divisions, and I became the biz dev person. The thing about the music industry that anybody who works in it knows is that it's more than probably any other industry I can think of, has been through such enormous evolutions in such a short amount of time that we had to constantly keep offering new services just to stay relevant as a company.
What do you think your best professional skills are?
Oh, the ones I'm best at, probably I'm really boring. I'm super organized. My executive functioning skills are very high. So that's boring, but helpful.
Very helpful.
Because now I'm an artist manager, and being an artist manager is like running an artist business. I run my own business. I run her business.
So you were with Girly Action for how long?
Over 25 years.
Over 25 years. Who are some of the artists that you worked with during that time?
Oh, God.
So many. It's a lot. 25 years is a lot. Just like what kind of music?
I mean, one of the first bands we ever represented was Bikini Kill. Mm-hmm. Still around. Someone who was at Girly Action until recently still represents them. No Doubt. When they had their very first big record, which everybody thinks probably was their first record, but actually was like their fourth record, but was the one that put them on the map. Yeah, there's just been so many. I mean, we've worked with everybody from Anthony and the Johnsons, who's now a Noni, Michelle DeGiacello, Tori Amos, Wyclef Jean. I mean, just tons and tons of artists of all different genres.
What made you decide to go out on your own and do artist management?
Well, I was doing artist management for 10 years within the company. Mm-hmm. And we just, at some point, it just made more financial sense for Felice and I to spin the company into two parts. Just from the way the economics of the business were going, it became more viable for me to be an artist manager without having to also think about the PR and marketing division and vice versa.
Right. And you are managing...
Now I'm only managing one artist, which is Addy Oasis.
Right.
I had 8 management clients. And then during the pandemic, I also realized I was tired of working 60 hours a week, and which I've been doing for over 25 years. So I let go of a lot of my management clients in those 2 or 3 years during the pandemic as well.
Yesterday afternoon, I met up with a former colleague of mine, and I told him I was going to hear Argentinian music at a bar with friends and then potentially going dancing, which I didn't end up doing. But he was like, that is the most Brooklyn thing I've ever heard. So
that's why we love Brooklyn.
That's why we love Brooklyn.
We have it all.
Yeah, we have it all. What do you love about being in the city versus the country?
First of all, let me just say, Brooklyn is, in my opinion, the most magical city on the planet. We are part of one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the world. We literally can have almost any experience we want. We've got people from every country in the world, every possible type of culture, including the oldest in the book and the newest trends. But most importantly, with Brooklyn in particular, and this is not necessarily true of all of New York City, and it's definitely not true of the United States in general, is that in Brooklyn, you can be very much a part of the melting pot without having to in any way diminish or relinquish any of your historical family culture. I remember my first 10 years living in Brooklyn, I would ride my bike around Prospect Park. And over here you have the Hasidim having a picnic, and over here you have the Jamaicans playing soccer, and over here you have some Chinese folks dancing, and everybody's barbecuing, and everybody's speaking in their native tongues. And you don't have to assimilate in Brooklyn to be a proud Brooklynite.
That's true.
And for us to love each other, ideally.
Right.
It's one of the few places in the country where if you step out your door, you have no choice but to interact with humanity.
Exactly.
From everywhere. And the subway is the great equalizer.
Yep.
Our city streets are the great equalizer. But in New York City, even people with money, even people with chauffeurs ride the subway because the goddamn traffic, who wants to deal with that?
This is very connected to one of the reasons I asked you on the podcast today.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I wonder right now in these times that we're living in is how can we model more productive, difficult conversations? And does being shoulder to shoulder with people help us? Is it helping us now? How can it help us?
I feel like the answer to your question directly is yes. Nowadays I live 75% or 80% of my time in the Catskills. My wife and I live on a road where, there are Trump signs that never went down. They've been there for 8 years and they're still there. And now they say Trump 2024. And these are our neighbors. But I know for a fact that most of these people, if I run into them, and some of them I've never met, but if I run into someone at the farmer's market or the hardware store, or the gas station or whatever, they're not going to necessarily just be hostile to me because I look like a feminist or I don't know what they think I am. But I do think that it all comes down to interpersonal relationships. The personal is political and vice versa. That's so true. And the more we get to know a person, the more accepting we can be of their differences. And I think that can apply on a macro level too. Going back to what's unique about New York City and Brooklyn in particular is because it also helps us as humans on a macro level to be more open-minded if we let in experiences from other cultures. If we seek out experiencing other people's cultures to the extent that we're welcome and invited into those experiences.
Mm-hmm. And by cultures, I don't know if you mean this, but I take it to mean more than ethnic cultures, but literally their lived experiences, whatever it may be.
Absolutely. It has to start with understanding where people are coming from.
Right. It's empathy.
Empathy and understanding what motivates people.
Right. And empathy is really hard when you have deep, visceral disagreements with someone's point of view because you believe that it is opposite of everything you believe in.
And because you believe that it could kill you.
Exactly.
If you're a person of color or a queer person or even a woman these days in this country, or especially if you're all three of those things, mm-hmm. your life could be in danger right now. So it's really hard to have that kind of empathy.
Can you talk about an example in your personal life where a conversation changed a point of view?
Yeah. What happened was I'm queer and my wife and I have 2 queer children with my ex and her partner. And one of our queer children identifies as trans. And my mother, who does not identify as a progressive, I can't say if she's a Trump supporter or not. I really don't know. I don't think so, but she's definitely not a progressive. And she married a guy in her later years who was a good old boy, Southern white guy, super nice to her and us, but racist, homophobic, the whole nine. So one day they were supposed to come visit us. It was the summer before last, I think. I get a phone call from him one night. It's 10 o'clock at night. And this is a guy who never calls me unless my mom's in the hospital or something. So I immediately answered the phone. I'm like, Bob, what's up? And he's like, he proceeds to tell me that he's very concerned about their upcoming visit to us because he's concerned that he's not going to be able to handle being around our youngest child who was born biological male and no longer identifies as a biological male and identifies as a femme-leaning, gender-neutral person. And I'll spare all the details of the conversation, but he was really concerned and he felt really bad about calling me, but he had to tell me this. Mm-hmm. And I said, Bob, I'm really glad you called. This is really important that we talk about this and that you share your feelings with us. This is how we grow. I said, listen, this is a learning experience for all of us. We're on a journey here. But the most important thing is we love our kid. And this is their journey. And this is how they want to be treated and how they want to be seen in the world. And we need to respect that. And we need to embrace them with love. But we can have this conversation ongoing. You can call me anytime. Mm-hmm. And I'm really happy to have the conversation. I think it's important. And I said, If you don't think you can handle it and you want to stay home, totally fine. Totally understand. Not a problem. Thank you for explaining, and you can stay home. Or you can come, and we'll continue to work through this as a family. Not only did he come, but on the last day he was there, he pulled aside our youngest child, the one who's now gender neutral, and apologized to them. And said, basically, I'm really sorry. I just don't really understand this. I'm an old guy. I have really old-fashioned viewpoints. My experience is informed by X, Y, and Z from a million years ago when I was in the army or whatever. And it wasn't like, I mean, he was offering an excuse, but it wasn't like we were meant to excuse him. It was just a gesture.
Right.
And, however limited it may or may not have been, he made the effort to put his hand out.
It was brave of him to put himself out there from where he started. Yes.
Extremely. And for someone who was starting from where he was starting, it was a huge step towards creating bridges of understanding between us as a family.
And we can do that without coddling people. We can do that without going overboard and congratulating them for doing a good thing. Yeah.
But we cannot do it without being willing to be uncomfortable. And let me tell you, both of them were uncomfortable. My mom's husband was uncomfortable in that moment, and so was our kid.
Right.
They both felt awkward and probably anxious and scared. It was probably scary for both of them.
Right.
But we have to be willing to do this.
And that's where the empathy comes in.
Exactly.
Because if you can do that with empathy, then breaking that wall of non-communication, and I struggle so much with this. I don't get involved in these conversations nearly as much as I would like to. So thank you for having this conversation here with me. There's another conversation you had with, and I cannot believe that this is the second time that Ice-T is going to come up in conversations with people I've interviewed, but that's how I roll. Tell us about a time when you were on a panel and what the panel was and what the circumstances were and what the conversation was with Ice-T that I'm talking about.
That was a fun one. It was a long time ago. This was back when CMJ still existed. So
CMJ, College Music Journal.
I mean, this was, I think, the early 90s. Because I think it was before we even had girly action. I had a radio show on WBAI, and I worked for a magazine called Outweek. So I was an openly feminist, openly queer pop culture journalist on the air and in print. And I got asked to be on a panel at CMJ called something to the effect of music and social change. I do remember that Ice-T was on the panel, and so was Nona Hendryx.
How would you describe Nona Hendryx's music?
The great LaBelle was legendary.
LaBelle, of course.
A quick little side comment, because I feel like they don't get props for this enough. LaBelle was the very first girl group, originally Patti LaBelle and Bluebells, who decided to shed the girl group image and become badasses. So anyway, we show up at the CMJ panel and we go back to the panel ready room. You show up like 45 minutes in advance and you talk about what you're going to talk about. And we all go in there, and Ice-T has an agenda from the moment we sit down. He's got some new organization he's launching or some activist initiative, and we're going to all talk about that. And Nona Hendryx and I just looked at each other like, no, we're not. Because we all had agendas, right? So anyway, we go out on stage. We're all sitting on this panel. We're talking about all sorts of things. And it's a packed room because I'm going to guess most of the people were there for Ice-T, because he was the most current and biggest person on the panel. And so they were, a lot of them from the hip hop community. And as soon as the audience commentary was open, the women were lining up at the mic and calling him out for stupid shit he said. And one person said, why do you go on stage and say, everybody in the audience, raise your hand, or whatever it was he would say, except for the gay people.
And probably using not that word. Yeah.
Except for the fags or homos or whatever terminology he said. This was a long time ago. And anyone who knows me knows that I don't always have the exact details accurate 20 years later.
Yeah, that would make you very unique.
But anyway, long story short, someone says this to him, and his answer is, Well, I just don't like it when guys try to hit on me in a bar. And I'm sitting literally right next to him, and I turn and I look at him and I'm like, dude, now you know how we feel as women all the fucking time. And you probably think you're giving us a compliment. So tell you what, why don't you just take it as a compliment when a guy tries to hit on you and just be like, thanks, but no thanks. And there's a pause, and he thinks for a minute, and he looks around the room and he looks at me and he's like, you know what? You're right. And that's why we're here today, so that we can talk to each other, because that's how we learn and grow. We're going to kick it together and we're going to learn and grow together. And I felt like, God, can I marry you? I couldn't have asked for a better response. I will never forget that as long as I live. And that is exactly what we're talking about today.
Exactly what we're talking about. So that's a good time to talk about the second thing I really wanted to talk to you about, which is what it's like to be us as we age in our careers. What is it like to get older in the music industry?
You know, that's a good question. And I don't know that I know the answer, because as many people who know me know, I don't think about or care a lot about my age. Maybe because I'm a lesbian, maybe because even if I wasn't a lesbian, I would probably never wear makeup and high heels. You know, a lot of the sort of tropes around aging that women seem to have, even more than men, I just never really embraced and thought about much. Nowadays, I'm aware that I look a lot older than I used to, but I also feel like, ironically, maybe not ironically, it's not ironic for those of us who live in it, but I've actually been getting more and more involved in the DJ and dance music world than ever before. And I think most people who don't know that world would think that's a very young world. But in fact, it's not. I feel like electronic and dance music, at least certain sectors of it, are unbelievably respectful of the elders and welcoming.
I mean, many of the DJs are our age.
Yeah, I mean, most good DJs, with a DJ, it's like the older you get, the better you get if you continue DJing. You know, it's just a fact.
Like a lot of things.
Yeah. But also, I think that people who are in that space understand and appreciate, like I know in house music, the whole concept of appreciating our history is very, very important. Muscle Cars, who I know you and I both share, is a local DJ crew that we both adore. Two young kids. I mean, they talk about this in interviews, how one of the things they love about their audiences is how it's all ages. And I didn't realize until last year that they are actually descendants of parents who hung out at Shelter.
Right.
They grew up with it. I have that with my kids.
Shelter was a famous dance
club.
Party from, when did the Shelter party start?
Pretty early on. I think after the Loft and maybe after Paradise Garage.
So so like in the
70s?
90s? No, because the Paradise Garage was a shorter period of time, and that was in the 80s.
So maybe towards the end of the 80s? I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds right. And it still happens.
You know, my kids are into DJ music, and they don't think anything of us all go into the same club to listen to the same DJs. That's not weird for them at all.
Right. My kids still don't like going out with me, but that's maybe a different. What do you think you've learned, whether it's from the music industry, from being in these underground or independent communities?
Interesting. In terms of what's important to me, I think with every passing year, and I think this was heightened by the whole Trump era and also heightened by the pandemic, but I always have felt this, is the importance of community. Certain genres of music in particular, and the types of music we like in particular, it's all about community.
It's all about community.
It's all about community. It's about the fact that I could go to a nightclub by myself and I might not know anyone there, but I still feel like I'm with my people.
From people I've talked to, DJs and such, New York is special in that regard. And probably at this point, Brooklyn is the epicenter for that. One other thing I think about a lot is how, as an older person in a scene that is majority, I mean, even if it's mixed in New York, it's still a majority youth scene. Because one big thing is most of the parties are late at night. So that's hard for us too. But there's this change that's happening to me that I'm very aware of, that there are some things that I just do because I've always liked to do it, like going out dancing. People look at me and are like, wow, you're so cool. You still go out dancing, or that's such a Brooklyn thing. It's like, well, don't we all have things that we always liked to do that we still like to do? There's a million kids out there now, and some percentage of them will never go dancing again after they start having families or just getting older or whatever it is. And then there will be some that just continue to do it because they love it so much. That connection to community, like you said, super important. For me, as a thinky person all the time, I love being in my body, and just that kind of connection to the music and a physicality that's super important to me. It's my gym in a lot of ways.
Yeah, totally.
I was going to say I don't like to go out late as much as I used to, but I never really liked being out late. The thing I love about since the pandemic is how many more early parties there are.
And day parties.
That's what I mean.
Day parties. Yay.
So what's next for you, Vickie Starr? What's something that you've got on the hopper for your future?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. Well, I do know, actually. I'm going to go back to DJing. I was never a big club DJ, but I did do a fair amount of DJing at my friend Brooke Webster's legendary lesbian bar called Meow Mix. And now I've decided I'm going to relearn my DJ skills. I've given myself a deadline. I have 8 weeks to learn.
And what I observe, Vickie, is that you're just doing the thing that I always talk about. Just keep moving forward. You just took the proverbial deep breath and started putting one foot in front of the other. I love this for you.
You were instrumental in that too. You gave me some coaching along the way. And I have to say, like, you really helped me just take that deep breath.
I'm glad to hear it.
And your podcast last year, or was it last year or the year before?
It was already like a year and a half ago already.
Yeah. I listened to every episode.
Thank you. All right. My final question for you. It's been said that the only thing that remains of us when we're gone are stories about us that people say, of what we do, of who we are. What do you hope your story or the legacy you leave will be?
You know, I thought about that. The first thing that came to my mind was, I think legacy is overrated. What I want to do more than anything is create more time and space for me to experience joy with my family, my friends, and my community. Mm-hmm. That's all I care about. That's how selfish I am. I just want to enjoy my life. Yeah. I want to be a good person. I want to bring love and happiness and joy to the people around me. I want to get love and happiness and joy from being around my people. And I want us to go out and fucking dance.
Boom. I love it. You are a shining light in the world and in my life. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Dori. I love you to pieces, and this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I have a favor to ask. If you like this episode, I would so appreciate if you would share it with at least one friend who might also enjoy listening. And how about taking another quick moment to rate it, or maybe write a short review on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube? Life Changing with Dori Fern is produced and edited by Ann Pope. Music is Cool Jazzy Bass and Vibraphone and Orange Blues by M33 Project. Thank you for listening. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with another life-changing conversation.